what motivates a team or teams on a daily basis or weekly basis in any given sport. And there are many factors that go into this, um, team spirit, energy, things like that. But like the energy, like line makers, they factor in the offense, the defense, how players are doing. All that's factored into the line. And if you use those stats to determine whether you're going to beat a point spread or not, you're going to end up losing. So you always want to use the motivational factor when you're betting on sports or trying to beat a point spread. So I'm going to go over some games from last week. There are about 3 games that give a good example of why this works so well. And it has a lot to do with conference play, conference matchups as well. So the first one I want to talk about is the college football game, Florida State and South Florida. And before I talk about it, South Florida is an interstate rival with Florida State, but you have to realize that South Florida is in the lower conference. They're in the American Conference. Florida State's in the ACC. So that's not really an interstate rival. I wouldn't put too much stock into that. And the previous week, Florida State, they came off an embarrassing conference matchup to Louisville. They lost by 43 points. And I did make a video on this saying that I did like Florida State, but that is the reason why I liked Florida State, is because they came off that embarrassing loss. And even though they're not going into a conference matchup again, they're playing against a weaker opponent like South Florida. And the line, given the line, it was low, like I said. Florida State ended up winning by 20 in this game. So it had more to do with the motivational factor of Florida State not wanting to lose again. So South Florida was 3-0 going into this matchup. So they really had nothing to play for other than they're playing an interstate rival that is better than them. So Florida State had more of the energy, more of the motivation, and that's something you have to realize when you're determining if you're going to win in sports betting or not. That's a number one tool you want to use, is the motivation factor. So that's one example. Another example, 2 of them in the NFL happened this week. It was Detroit and Green Bay, and Washington and the Giants. And both of these are division matchups. Detroit playing Green Bay. Now, obviously, Detroit came off a loss the previous week. Green Bay came off a loss to Minnesota in a division game. And they're both on losses. So what do you do when you have 2 teams playing each other that came off losses that are in the divisional game? Those could really go either way to me. I mean, you could make a case for both teams having motivation. So what I would do on a matchup like this is I would wait till the second half to see if there's any separation between the teams. And obviously there was in this Green Bay game. They separated. They got a big lead against Detroit. And if you would have taken Detroit to come back in the second half, you would have won. And they did come back and cover the exact line, the original line as well. So you could have won there if you took it. But it was a blowout at first. So like I said, you could have made a case for both teams. Depending on what you had for the original line, you could either lost or won, depending on the line that you had, because it landed on 7 and the line was 6.5. You could have got it at 7.5 or 7. So it just depends on what you took, but the value was definitely there on the second half, especially with 2 teams coming off of losses. No real sign of one team having more of an edge or more motivation than the other team to start, because they were both motivated off of losses. Now another one is the Washington and the New York Giants game. And this one had a significant motivational edge shifting toward Washington, because the Giants came off of a win the previous week. Washington lost the divisional game to the Dallas Cowboys. So obviously, Giants weren't upset going into the game against Washington. Washington was upset going into the game. So here we have an edge for Washington with the motivational factor. Now, Washington would have been my play here. This would have been a good example of a game that you want to get on for the week. And Washington did end up winning. They won by 2 points, I believe. The line was plus 3.5 for them. So these are just important tips that you want to use when you're trying to beat a point spread. And this will put you over the top and give you a serious advantage over the rest of sports bettors if you use this certain tool when you're betting, and stay away from all the other games that are meaningless throughout the week, that are the teams are just out there on the court or out there on the field just playing each other, where it could just be a coin flip, land on either side of the spread. So this is I hope you got a lot of information out of this video, and I'm going to be making another video about perception again and explaining that as well. So comment, rate, and subscribe, and I'll see you then.